Hi everyone. Welcome,
Uh,
welcome. Everyone's just rolling in. Lovely to see you all. Just give everybody a couple of minutes to roll in and check there's no major technical hitches with people getting in. Looks like it's working. Thanks so much everyone for being here today at this Food for Life Early Years webinar, a recipe to grow, play and learn, and we're very much focusing on tastes and textures today. So we'll do a full intro, but we'll just give everyone a couple of minutes to roll in, make sure nobody's left behind. If you're not familiar with Teams, there are a few ways for you to interact with us today. There is a little speech bubble icon at the top of the screen, which is the chat bar, so you can chat to us through there, ask any questions. If you've got any tech issues, put them in the chat. If it's within our control, we'll try and work it out for you. And it'd be lovely if you could just pop in the chat who you are and where you're coming in from today, where you're based. And by way of introduction for me, my name's Chloe Smee and I'm a Senior Programme Manager at Food for Life. And I have the joy of overseeing our early years programme, and I've supported a number of nurseries to work through our early years awards. And yeah, really passionate about the role that food can play in learning and experiences and the growth of our smallest people. Brilliant. So Gay, would you give me like an emoji thumbs up if you think most people are starting to appear now? Got a decent number, haven't we? We've got about 20 folks in. So fabulous. I think we'll kick off because everybody's taken time out from their busy afternoons to be here. So let's make the most of the time we've got together. As I say, my name's Chloe Smee, here representing Food for Life with two of our fabulous training colleagues, Lee Harland and Faye Walters. And we've got the fabulous Gay in the background doing lots of magic behind the scenes to connect everybody together and make this all work. So yeah, great to have you all here today. You could move on to the next slide, please, Gay. So today's webinar, which is very much focusing on tastes and textures and the importance of exploration for young children in their food education journey, is the fourth webinar in a series of four that we've run over the past kind of year and a few months. And that range of webinars is listed on the slide in front of you. If you weren't at any of those previous webinars, they are all available online, along with lots of resources through our Learning and Skills Hub around menu planning, nutrition, food education, and a real focus at our last webinar on teas and snacks, which are a really key part of children's nutritional intake and their learning. Next slide, please, Gay. Just by way of context, for those of you who aren't familiar with Food for Life, we're part of the Soil Association, a food and farming charity, and very much our vision is around enabling healthy and sustainable diets for everyone, irrespective of where you live, where you're from. And our vision is to make sure that every child has a healthy and sustainable meal every day, and that food sets the habits of a lifetime. We also want to join forces for positive change, which means really working with early years settings and schools up and down the country to make sure we're providing early years practitioners, early years cooks, school teachers, school leaders with the resources and the expertise that they need to set children up for a healthy and sustainable diet for life. Early years work is so key around setting those habits. You'll all have experiences in your own settings around the barriers that exist to supporting children to eat really well. And I know that you'll all be working day in, day out to try and overcome those barriers and make food seem enticing and exciting. There's been recent government guidance out from SACN looking at texture and taste specifically, and how important it is in nutrition in the early years. And we're increasingly eating diets that are a bit less, are a bit more bland and more based on high fat, salt, sugar foods, and children aren't necessarily getting those experiences in a range of tastes and textures that really help them to eat well, and particularly to eat fresh whole fruits and vegetables, and experience and enjoy all of those tastes and flavors. So that's kind of the motivation for what we're looking at today. Primarily, we're here today to launch our fantastic new resource, which is called A Recipe to Grow, Play and Learn Tastes and Textures. So Lee and Faye will be talking us through that fantastic resource later, and we'll be launching it and sharing it with you all today. And it's a really practical, accessible resource with some very simple activities that we hope you can all implement in your settings to help your little people explore taste and texture and feel a bit more confident and a bit more exploratory in what they're willing to eat. Next slide, please. Yeah, so today we're very much hoping that you'll take away what we're going to be talking about is that understanding of food education and how our new resource links to the early years foundation stage curriculum. Understanding the Food for Life Early Years Award, increased confidence in planning and delivering really simple but really engaging practical cooking and growing ideas. And yeah, you'll certainly take away the fantastic new resource that Lee and Faye have been working away on based on feedback from early years practitioners. So you'll have that in your back pocket when you leave today. Next slide, please, Kate. Very briefly, just to talk about our early years award framework, I can see there's lots of familiar names, lots of familiar folks that have joined us today who are already Food for Life early years settings. For those who are not, just as a brief intro, Food for Life's whole setting approach is really grounded in the idea that as well as providing a healthy and sustainable meal for your children every day, so making sure that the menu's good, it's nutritionally sound, you're buying sort of high welfare meat and free range eggs and all the rest of it, the children are also learning through their wider environment why that matters, what they're eating, where it comes from, how they might grow it, how they might cook it, how to be confident exploring it. So we've worked with nurseries up and down the country where exploring food, whether that's smelling food, printing with food, tasting food, growing food, is really important, a really important part of the learning every day in the setting. And that kind of environmental picture is what we're keen to support. So our early years award framework does look at the food on the plate, but it also looks at food leadership. It looks at food education, very much linking that to the early years foundation stage. And it very much looks at links into the community. So involving parents, carers, local farmers, local producers, helping them to support the efforts and the hard work that you and your nursery cooks are putting in every day to make sure your children are well fed and nourished. And just one more point around that is that when we're talking about tastes and textures, it brings up a lot around selective eating, fussy eating, which I'm sure are massive issues for you all every day in your setting. We're going to be focusing today on how the whole environment around the food and around the curriculum and around play and around sensory learning can help to create an environment where children are more willing to explore with food. Selective eating issues, as you'll know, are very personal. They're sometimes linked to the special needs that children might have in your setting. So we're not going to be delving into individual cases of selective eating on this call. We're going to be talking about that whole environment and how it can foster more positive eating behaviours and kind of willingness to try. Lee Harland, who's on the call today and you'll be meeting in a second, is our specialist nutritionist for the early years, and those settings that are enrolled with Food for Life can reach out to Lee for support with those individual cases that you might have in your nursery where you just feel like you're banging your head against a brick wall trying to get a child to eat more than beige food every day. So yeah, really understand those issues, but we're not going to get into the particulars today. We'll talk about the bigger picture. And with that, I think I'm going to pass over to you, Lee, to start delving into the content of the fabulous resource you're going to share with us today.
Lovely. Thanks, Chloe. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm Lee Harland. Thanks for the intro. Lovely to see lots of you on the call today, and there's some that I'm recognising names of that have been on previous webinars that we've done. So hopefully you've got some sort of cuppa in your hand. Please get yourself comfortable and we will talk you through our new resource. So this slide here is around just a very quick recap of the early years foundation stage. I'm sure that you're all aware of its content. You guys are the experts in this. And we did touch on this on the previous webinars, but I just really want to kind of highlight how all of the different documents really do link together. So this framework is mandatory, as we all know, for all early years practitioners in England from the 1st of September 2021. The Early Years Foundation stage sets all of the standards for early years providers, and they must meet these to ensure that the children learn and develop well and are kept healthy and safe. It promotes kind of teaching and learning to ensure children's school readiness and gives children the broad range of knowledge and skills that provide the right foundation for good future progress throughout their school, but also life beyond that. But all of our resources that we've developed and the one that we're launching today make the links back to these stages of learning and highlight these within the resources for your reference. So we've done that bit for you. And the idea of the resources are to make your lives basically a little bit easier within your settings and give you as practitioners the confidence to pick up and deliver these activities with your children. They're designed to be fun, to be interactive, and can be tailored to meet the needs of your children within your settings. Next slide, Gay, please. We're going to play a film, a very short film that was created after we delivered a celebration event in Nottinghamshire last year. Some of you may have seen this if you were on previous webinars, but I think it really does showcase some of the lovely Food for Life work that's happening in early year settings. This event that we delivered in Nottinghamshire was a practical celebration event whereby early years practitioners made a number of simple yet really tasty dishes kind of on a carousel basis to visually see how easy it is to prepare the likes of, you know, a tasty snack or a tea or a lunch offering. And from this event, the feedback from the practitioners was that they would really benefit from some practical pick-up, easy to deliver resources that are going to touch on all of these aspects of food and growing and cooking. So we listened and here we have them, a series of 4 resources. The film captures some lovely activities within the settings that I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with already or are actually already doing. So we'll click on the link for the film and let's hope we have some sound. If it doesn't work, don't worry, we'll pop the link in the chat and you guys can watch it at your leisure. But fingers crossed.
So I have just clicked on the link. I'm going to try. This is where it all gets very complicated, but it's all going a little bit Inception now because it's a thing within a thing within a thing. I'm going to try and make this happen for you.
Okay.
Oh, hang on a minute. Sorry, just take that back to the beginning. I'm hoping that this is going to work because I'm going to have to unshare and then reshare. So just give me 2 seconds.
Thanks.
Oh. Really hoping I can go back. Yeah, I'm not convinced that I'm going to be able to share this without disconnecting all of you from the webinar. So I think probably what we'll do is we'll put the link for the video in the chat, and then you can watch it at your leisure. It is a lovely video though. It's definitely, I can recommend it.
That's fine. Thanks, Gay. No worries. Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide, which is again just a very quick recap from the previous slides that we've talked about and webinars that we've delivered on early years voluntary food and drink standards. And again, we've gone over these. You guys will know these inside out. We talked previously in detail about kind of menu planning and how many meals, for example, should be served per day in settings, and the importance of a nutritionally balanced offering throughout that day. And our new resources focus on these standards and give lots of practical ideas of cooking, growing, for a given meal. So not just lunch or not just tea. So it's across the whole day. And the recipes in these resources are aimed to be really inclusive. They're cheap to make, they're easy to make, they meet the standards, but most importantly, they're really tasty. They've all been trialed and tested, and they're really, really good. The idea is to use these activities and recipes within your settings so that children are starting to become familiar with new foods, new flavours, new textures, and it also gives you some more creative ideas to present to your children. As we all know that our children eat regularly, it's almost like you've served breakfast and it feels like 10 minutes later, then you're serving lunch and snacks and tea, and so it goes on. And often we run out of exciting ideas to serve to our children. So it's about kind of just giving some new creative ideas. And the resource focuses on, this particular resource, Taste and Textures, that we're looking at today, focuses on 3 recipes within the resource, all with a potato theme, all of which can be adapted to use, you know, throughout lunch, tea or snack, depending on your menus. So I'm just going to pass over to Faye, who's going to talk you through the early years award criteria in a little bit of depth, and then we'll move on to actually having a really good look at the resource itself.
Thanks, Lee, and hi everyone. Great to see everyone today. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about how this resource supports the early years award criteria. It's the food education criteria primarily that the Taste and Textures resource supports, as do the tea and snacks resources that we showed you during our last webinar at the end of June. Taste and Textures contains 3 healthy recipes for the children to be involved with preparing, as well as suggestions for exploring and growing some of the ingredients that these recipes use. So in support of criteria 3.1 around growing, this resource includes the growing guidance around the growing of potatoes and herbs for these recipes, and in support of criteria 3.2 around cooking sessions. It's these produce that they grow can then be used by the children in making the mini potato cakes or pea and potato tortilla. Next slide, please, Gay. And so, but also, as well as the food education criteria, the resource does also touch on our food leadership criteria, as the children are taking an active role in what food is being provided for them. So this involvement, their sort of investment, if you like, in their food through growing potatoes, for example, and finding out what taste and flavours they enjoy by growing and sampling herbs. As we know, that can lead to children becoming more willing to try things that they previously might have refused. And equally, the recipes within these resources are perfect for sending home. So if you notice the child or children particularly enjoying one of the recipes, it can go home with that child to encourage the making of healthy recipes at home too. I guess once these food activities are embedded in your setting, there is the opportunity to invite grandparents in to help with growing, for example, or with a walk to the local allotment, or to visit a local farm if you have that opportunity to see ingredients from these recipes growing sort of on a larger scale. It gives them a chance, the children, to sort of, you know, see where their food comes from, you know, understand the natural world, and also link it back to the food that they're eating, and how they can be involved in that growing process too. There might also be an opportunity in your setting to invite families in to sample these recipes that the children have been involved in making as well. So there's that opportunity around food, the food leadership criteria and the community and partnerships criteria. Next slide, please. Oh, this is over to you, Lee.
Yeah, thank you. Fabulous. So before we actually launch into the resource itself and you get a peek of it, I just wanted to highlight this slide around the new government guidance that Chloe's already touched on. So I'm sure, again, most of you on the call will be aware or have read or have at least you know, had the link sent through. This report was published on the 4th of July this year, called Feeding Young Children Aged 1 to 5. It's got a real emphasis on tastes and textures within the summary report. So it's really great timing to launch kind of at this resource alongside the new government guidance. I've just popped on 3 kind of the key recommendations that really kind of stood out for us. The very first one is the one that we're going to touch on the most, which kind of, you know, that's in the resource. So where children, the key recommendations from this report are that children should be presented with unfamiliar vegetables on multiple occasions, up to kind of 8 to 10 or more times for each vegetable, to help develop regular consumption. The other one, which we're not going to touch on today, but I know there's been loads and loads and loads of kind of debate and consultation around peanuts and hen's eggs. So deliberate exclusion of peanut or hen's eggs and foods containing these beyond 12 months actually may increase the risk of allergy to the same foods. So once introduced, these foods should continue to be consumed as part of the child's usual diet in order to minimise the risk of allergy. I've popped that one in just to highlight for those of you who may not have seen that, to be able to kind of go back and have a look at the government guidance to be able to kind of tackle that one within your settings. But the link will be popped in the chat at the end of the session, that will take you directly to this new guidance. And then the third key recommendation that we've pulled out is a reduction to reduce the consumption of foods, including snacks that are energy dense and high in fat, sugar and salt, whilst encouraging healthier snacks. And on our previous webinar, we actually, you know, we talked quite a lot about snacks being, rather than bringing it out of a packet, it's almost like a mini meal in itself. And we talked about kind of all sorts of different options and recipes that you could use to provide as a healthier snack. So what we've done is we've taken some of this guidance and incorporated it into our resource in a fun and engaging way, so that you guys are able to create kind of more exposure, colour, choices, and acceptability to foods that may be currently foreign or kind of daunting to your children. We know that the range of tastes and textures that children are comfortable with exploring at the moment are narrowing massively. So we hope, again, that some of just the top tips, not everything within the resource is going to be suitable to you in your settings, but hopefully provide you some ideas and top tips on how to tackle some of the common issues. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight that, and you will have access to the link shortly after the session. So without further ado, passing back to Faye, who's going to take you through a little sneaky peek of the resource. So yeah, over to you, Faye.
Great, thanks, Lee. So yeah, here we go. A recipe to grow, play and learn tastes and textures. So the format is the same for this resource as it was for tea and snacks that we introduced earlier in the year. This is the front cover here that details what activities are included and how each activity links to the early years foundation stage framework. As Lee said, we've kind of done that mapping work for you, and you can very clearly see how they support what you need to teach in your settings, and you can go straight to the resource that you need in there. We've also added some literacy links, so some nice sort of connections to lovely books out there that are relevant to the content. So such as Soup Potato, because obviously the key ingredient running through the 3 recipes in this resource is potatoes. So next slide, please. Let's have a look inside as well. So the first area of activity here is around growing. And the growing of different ingredients for the recipes. The main one, as I said, being potatoes, with ideas on how to grow them, different container options that you can use. Certainly, it's not something that has to cost anything. You can just grow potatoes in an old compost bag, which is actually a really lovely way of doing it with young children, because it's great once they are ready to harvest, to tip that bag upside down and do a great bit of maths in counting how many potatoes that they've managed to grow. It can be really as simple as that. So this initial section, as you'll see on the right-hand image there, it's a copy of the growing card for potatoes, and the resource also has the same thing for spring onions and parsley that are included in the recipes. It basically gives you all the details you need around when to plant them, equipment you might need, advice and guidance at various stages of growth, and harvest times. So everything that you need is there ready to print off. So nice and hopefully straightforward, and makes that really something that's achievable and really go to for you. Next slide, if we can, please, Gay. So the next section is around, potato printing. So we've got a bit of messy fun activity to get their creative juices flowing, just playing a bit with potatoes, printing, and enjoying that side of handling food. And also there's an activity here around what food comes from animals. We created a matching game which encourages children to think about where different ingredients from the recipes come from. So it's again beginning to sort of understand the natural world and make those connections. So as the activities focuses animals, there's matching cards including like cows, milk, butter and cheese, and chickens and eggs, so that they can either kind of match up the colourful pictures or draw lines between them if they're beginning to hold a pen, the older ones, to make those connections for themselves. Okay, the next section I'm going to hand over to Lee is around food refusal, fussy eating, and the real nitty-gritty of the taste and textures.
Thanks, Faye. So yeah, this is quite a big section, and there's quite a lot to kind of go through. But the resource itself has some really nice kind of top tips for you to start embedding back into your settings to get you started. But we thought it was quite important to kind of really touch on some of the nitty-gritty of it. We know, and having been, got children myself, having been in settings, having been a teacher in a previous life, like you really do get a sense of kind of food is becoming more and more of an issue. We know that feeding difficulties in children are very common. And in fact, behaviours such as refusing new foods are a normal stage of a child's development. Many of us are actually unaware of this and feel that sometimes the child is just being fussy. The way that we manage meal times and the use of rules around food can have a real influence on how children behave and what foods that they will and might not eat. So we'll just go through some of the key points and some of the bits that we've taken out of the guidance as well about what we can actually do as practitioners in settings. So I think the first thing is really that by understanding how our own behaviour can influence feeding, and by learning strategies to encourage healthy eating, hopefully you will be then empowered to kind of confidently and positively manage children's eating behaviour, for them to enjoy a healthy and varied diet that's then going to stand them in good stead and promote good health for their future. Many children refuse to eat certain foods, and there's usually a pretty good reason for this. So the research is kind of out there, and it's becoming more and more kind of in our faces now. So food refusal, let's touch on food refusal, which is basically either the refusal of new foods or the refusal of foods that maybe were once eaten without having any fuss. It basically reflects a basic fear response. This fear response is very normal. It's part of a child's development. And most children go through this phase, which tends to peak around maybe 2 years of age. And I'm sure you've all, seen it at some stage within your careers and your settings. I've certainly seen it personally with my kids. Children show this fear by refusing, obviously, to taste new foods that they think it might look a little bit different. This might be a food that has a different colour, for example, a different shape, a different feel that they're not familiar with, so they're almost scared of it. So as children become more aware of their sensory properties of food, they also begin to their brains start working overtime, they scrutinise all the food that are being given to them. Children might also begin refusing foods that were, obviously, I mentioned, that were previously liked. Children might say, I don't like that. And it's very frustrating as the practitioner or the person who's providing the food, when somebody automatically says, I don't like it without trying. They might push the food away from their plates and even cry if they're made to try a little bit. And that's where their fear response is coming in. So if a food is tasted, it might be refused on the basis of its sensory properties. So the child might not be familiar with that food, the colour. They might never have seen that food outside of the setting. They might not have ever seen it at home or out and about. Bitter tastes are often disliked. And since many vegetables are bitter tasting, these are common foods that children tend to refuse first off. Again, very frustrating when we're all trying so hard to, come up with new recipes and have compliant menus, for example. And for a child to refuse continuously is really frustrating. So why do children often refuse food? I've mentioned before, it's a fear. It's also called neophobia. And it's believed to be a response that developed as a way of ensuring that, for example, our ancestors, they didn't eat any potentially poisonous foods. So our ancestors had to scavenge for food. They didn't have information on packages, they didn't have use by dates, they didn't have best before dates, they didn't have ingredients list. So they really had to be wary of the food that they were eating. So it kind of makes sense that children are a little bit scared of new foods. So there's lots of things that we can do within the settings, to try and help children overcome their natural, uncertainty and to encourage them to try and eat new things or try or touch or smell or lick or taste. So by understanding that new foods and previously liked foods, for example, may be refused at a predictable stage in children's development on the basis of their colour, smell, taste, and texture associations, we can then start to begin to see the mealtime from the child's point of view. So if we understand why they might have a fear, then it's easier for us to tackle this behaviour. But just a key point is, and again, you guys are all experts on the call, a period of fussiness and food refusal is very normal. It's not something that you're doing that's making the child refuse that food. It's very normal as their brains are developing as well. We know unhealthy food preferences. So children are born with a tendency to prefer sweet tastes and to dislike bitter tastes. I've mentioned previously that vegetables, for example, have a natural kind of bitter taste, and this is why they're often less popular. children are more than willing to eat unhealthy foods. So your typical type of food, your crisps, your biscuits, your sweets, your breads, your kind of cakes, your ultra processed products that might come out of a packet, but less willing to eat the healthy foods that we're all talking about and wanting the best for our children. But in recent years, we've had an increasing number of adults and children having developed real health problems related to an unhealthy diet. So this is why we're developing the resources that we're developing to really try and put it into a fun way for you guys to then be able to take back to your settings. Another thing just to mention is it's never too late to make changes to increase the quality of a child's diet, and nor is it ever too early to educate a child on healthy eating. So it might be that your children are actually spending more of their time, their lives at the moment in your settings than they are at home. So it's an ideal setting and opportunity to grab those learning experiences within your settings. Healthy food is normal food. This is a message as well. Healthy food should be the norm. Absolutely should be the norm. And really, we shouldn't really be making a big fuss about it. If the child is not familiar with healthy foods, then obviously they're less likely to eat it. So it's our jobs as practitioners and educators to really try and focus and start introducing new foods into the settings. So my piece of advice and the guidance out there says, make your setting, where possible, a healthy setting. And that doesn't just mean the food, the lunch, the tea, the snack. Literally from the minute that the child walks through your doors to the minute that they leave to go home, it should be a healthy setting. So lots of props, lots of pictures, lots of messy play around food, lots of kind of growing activities, lots of greenery on the windowsills, growing herbs, lots of kind of foods around the place that they can touch and smell and become familiar with. Really, so it's you're making food an integrated part of the learning experience within your setting. Education, really key to help children to actually understand the importance of these types of foods and why we want them to eat that. And that can be done from a really small age. And if we can, get our little ones at, a teeny tiny age, you're more likely that they're going to grow in to kind of healthier habits as they grow through your setting. Another thing that we touch on is pressure to eat. Quite often, food refusal could be linked to pressure, and I'm not for any reason here saying that anybody does this, but some of the little tips within the resource are around avoid pressure to eat. So pressurizing a child to eat can actually lead to unintentional consequences. And often parents, I've been there, hands up, guilty, practitioners, teachers, whoever it might be, sometimes might find themselves using pressure, force or coercion to try and get the child to kind of try something or finish their meal, for example. And pressure can take many forms. So pressure itself, so an example, I want you to eat all those carrots. And that pressure that the child is, it might be that there's too many carrots on the plate, and that poor child is thinking, God, I need to eat them all. I need to eat them all. The pressure, really can have a negative effect. Coaxing is another one, is an example of pressure. So just eat a little bit, just a tiny bit. Go on. You wouldn't say that, or generally you wouldn't say that about a pudding. Go on, just have a bit. Go and have a bit. Go on. So that's an example of kind of a pressure that we want to kind of move away from. Other examples might be emotional blackmail, the use of rules, for example. So, and you hear this quite a lot. I've heard this quite a lot. If there's potatoes, for example, as part of the meal, go on, have 2 because you're 2 years old, so you need 2. Or go on, have 3 carrots, or have 3 bits of broccoli because you're 3 years old. And it might be actually that child stomachs, we've got to remember that the children's stomachs are tiny. They're really, really small. And actually that might be a little bit overwhelming for the child. Bribery, we don't want to be bribing our children at all. If you eat that, then you can leave the table, or if you eat that, you can have something. Punishments, you know, you can't go and play outside unless you finish your broccoli, whatever it might be. These are things that we really, you know, might have an opposite effect to what we actually intended. And while a child may eat, you know, a little more when being coerced, for example, being pressured really can have a negative effect, an association with food, and ultimately dislike and avoid food all the way into adult life. You know, it can stop children from recognizing and responding appropriately as well to the likes of hunger and fullness, which can lead to kind of overeating in later life. And one of the key points as well is I have lots of conversations around this, is sometimes the portion sizes that we're serving are unrealistically large, meaning that it's unrealistic to expect the child to finish that particular portion. Whereas if we just reduced our portion sizes down, the child is less likely to feel kind of overwhelmed. And if they want more, and you know, you can read the room, you know your children within the setting, then that's absolutely fine. And we also encourage kind of self-serve as well. So it might be if you've got the resources, if you've got the time, there's lots of factors that kind of are in there. But yeah, it's even if you've got a plated service, you might have the protein on the plate and then allow the children to maybe, you know, self-serve their carbs and then a variety of veggies that they can, you know, that they can choose from. So there's different ways and means, and it's about kind of trying to embed and integrate different styles into your settings that would work. So things to try. Not saying there's an awful lot to take in here, and you will get the slides after. But just some little tips. So eating together, really important that children pick up really healthy eating habits from day dot, basically. Sitting at a table as well, and actually sharing, you know, the enjoyment of food. We as adults, we might go out for lunch with friends, we might go out for, you know, a meal on an evening with friends, and it's a social gathering, and it should really be embedded with the little ones as well from a tiny age. Talk about food that you enjoy, but don't over talk about it. You know, oh wow, have you seen, look how crunchy these carrots are, for example, and then you know, stimulating different sensory responses. One of the biggies is avoid making negative comments about food. We don't all like the same food. We're all human. We're all different. But you know, if you within, you know, the practitioner within the room, and they're serving sardines on toast, for example, whatever it might be, if you're not keen on sardines, don't show the children that you're not. And it's all about kind of positive. You are their role model. They'll look up to you. So it's about kind of, you know, making the most of that and encouraging the children to try where possible. And I think really above all, as the guidance, the new government guidance says, eat and present a wide variety of different foods to kind of keep stimulation and keep the children's interest. They probably won't eat it first off. So it's little bits and integrating kind of a new vegetable within not just the plate, but the overall learning and kind of activities. So as we're doing within the resource. We're actually delivering our a training session coming up in Walsall to early years practitioners, where we're going to be focusing on lots of textures and look at the way of kind of tackling fussy eating through practical cookery and growing activities for early years practitioners to be able to then, you know, embed back into the learning. We have actually recently added this resource to our training offer. So if you are interested and wanted to even just find out a little bit more about kind of our face-to-face offer, our details and all of the information will be sent out after the webinar, just to keep an eye on that. Next slide, Gabe, please. Which takes us on to just the last bullet point for the actual resource. So this takes us on to the recipes and that are embedded within this resource, which we've touched on. So a real potato focus through this one. Not only is it a great way to use homegrown produce, it's cheap, and potatoes are really quite versatile. You can do all sorts with them, and children actually tend to be quite accepting of these textures. So the recipes, we've got a leek and potato soup, we've got potato cakes and a pea and potato tortilla. And again, all of these have been tried and tested. They're all delicious. And for example, the soup. So you can start off with a kind of blended texture, leading up to, you know, a slightly lumpier, leading right up to a chunkier texture of soup as your children become more and more familiar, so that they can actually see that there's some potatoes in the soup, and there's also some, you know, some leeks in the soup. Same with the potato cakes. Potato cakes are brilliant because they've got that texture of kind of, it could be like a hash brown or a patty type texture, and you can add all sorts again. So get the children to make them, and the resource goes into a little bit more depth of that. Get them to, you know, to mash the potatoes. It might be that you're growing some herbs on the, you know, on your windowsill, and you're adding in some spice as their, you know, as their taste buds change as they go up through the years within your setting. And then the pea and potato tortilla, that's quite a chunky texture, and, you know, building up to maybe offering something like like that on your menus. But please do have a look on the links when they're sent round. Try them at home yourselves because they're really good, and you'll actually see how easy they are. The ingredients are all very minimal. There's nothing flash or fancy, and no fancy equipment is needed to do these as well, which is a plus, because we all know that settings are not really set up or equipped for full-on cookery lessons. So please do try them, and yeah, we'll send the links around shortly. So next slide, Gay, please. So that takes us to the end, really, of the resource. We've given you a little sneak preview of kind of what's involved. If there are any questions, more than happy to try and answer any if anybody has any, or if anybody wants to share anything, you know, of any experiences maybe that anybody's had around tackling this kind of issue. More than happy to kind of share. But yeah, I'll pass back to Chloe. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Lee and Faye. Loads of fantastic content in there. Real food for thought. Terrible pun. Yeah, really interesting to, you know, think about food. You know, it's really not just the experience of the food that's on the plate that matters when you're thinking about fussy eating. It's that whole, yeah, the really clear images in my mind when you were talking about kind of walking into the setting and the kind of experience that they have around healthy food, and, you know, whole fruit and veg being around and accessible for them to explore. Really made me think about a nursery we worked with recently. I don't know if there's anyone on the call from Learning Tree in Nottinghamshire, but they did lots of work with their menu, kind of deconstructing some of the less popular dishes on the menu. So like a fish pie, they'd sort of, instead of doing a whole fish pie, they'd sort of have the potato and the fish and the veggies, and then slowly they'd build up to integrating it into, you know, the dish that we all know to be fish pie, to just build the children's confidence and get over that sort of lack of familiarity. And then they could do more work around those sort of separate ingredients as well, as Lee and Faye were saying, you know, grow the potatoes and then, you know, get confident with those on the plate before they manage to eat that whole dish. Yeah, and there's a question in the chat. Gay's just asking any stories around transformation around food preferences, either yourself or in your setting, a child that's maybe has had real barriers to eating, and you've seen a real, you've overcome that barrier by doing something creative around your menus or the kind of learning experience that you've got around food. You're welcome to take your mics off and share, or pop it in the chat if you're more comfortable doing that. And there's a question in there around, will the resource pack be emailed to us or sent by post? So yeah, we will put a link into the chat to the resource and where it is on our website at the end of this session, and we'll also email that out to everybody, so you can kind of file it away or forward that email on to your colleagues. Yeah, and definitely support in the chat there, Lee, for that idea around children serving their own, really helping them to overcome barriers. Yeah, and it helps to cope with that sort of over-facing issue you talked about with portion sizes, if they can give themselves the right amount of food for them.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Any more questions from anybody? Fabulous. Well, just before we share that resource and say goodbye, I think Gay's going to pop a link just to a very, very quick 2-minute survey in the chat. If you are able to follow that link and just fill in a couple of quick questions just about this session, it's really helpful to us to improve what we're doing, but also we're a charity and we're dependent on evidencing the work we do to funders to get more money and keep doing the work that we're doing. So it really helps to have feedback from people so that we can do that. So yeah, would love it if you'd follow that link and take 2 minutes to fill that in. Yeah, and there is a specific question there, Lee, around a child who thinks they're going to be sick after eating. It's obviously been traumatized by a previous experience. So that might be one for you to pick up outside of this call.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to have a chat. I think with the email that's sent round, my email address will be on there. So more than happy, please do drop us an email. It's quite a common one, that one. It's around fear. It's around kind of fear of choking sometimes with children, and they just say that they're going to be sick just so that, you know, the practitioner or the parent, whoever it is, just avoids it, and, you know, nobody wants your child to be sick. So they, you know, it's a very, very good tact that children use, and it's very common. But yeah, we can discuss that certainly after. It comes back down to avoiding the pressure as well. So allowing the child to, you know, to take control. It might be that there's fajitas, for example. You know, it's a really good recipe for little ones where they can actually build their own meal. So encouraging, but allowing the child to kind of put the protein, get the wrap, get the protein, then they can actually choose their little bits that they make. So they feel comfortable that they've made their own kind of personal little fajita or wrap or whatever it might be. But yeah, it's not easy.
Brilliant. Okay, well, there's some great examples coming through. Definitely, Lizzie, sounds like you're doing some fantastic things in your nursery. Yeah, sounds like you've seen a bit of a transformation there with children really resisting and resisting the food that you're serving on your menus, and taking that sort of whole setting approach, looking at the growing, looking at conversations with parents, and slowly seeing those results. And yeah, it can be frustrating if you're not seeing results in a short space of time. I think especially with small children, it's always important to think about their diet over the week, not just the day as well. So I think just reinforcing that message about, you know, taking the pressure off for that meal and just thinking, are they getting the kind of nutrient range through the week is important. Fabulous. Well, if there are no other questions, we will wrap up by dropping this fabulous resource into the chat here. So the link at the top there that Gay's put in the chat is to the new government guidance that Lee mentioned, which, yeah, massively relevant for all of us on this call. The second link is to the resource that Lee and Faye have been introducing today. So that's exploring taste and texture. And yeah, really hope you find that useful, and there's ideas in there that you can take forward in your setting. We'd love to hear from you if you have success with it, or if some of the ideas today have helped some of your children and practitioners to do the fantastic work that you're doing around food with your small people. But yeah, thank you everyone so much for joining us today. Would love to hear your feedback, and particular thanks to Lee and Faye for putting all the hard work into this resource and developing something that looks so accessible and practical and useful. And yeah, massive thanks to Gay as well behind the scenes, trying to make lots of different platforms connect, which is always the most fun part of any job, isn't it? So brilliant. Have lovely evenings, everybody, and I hope you have a delicious tea. Thank you and goodbye.